Resist. Revolt. Resistance Radio. We conquer. Resistance Radio.
This is John DeNugent, and you're listening to the Resistance Report.
Hi, this is Jack Sen. You're listening to Resistance Radio. Simon Roche represents Suidlanders of South Africa, the world's largest non-state civil defense organization. His role is to oversee the implementation of the nation's national emergency plan in an anticipated civil war between the nation's majority and minority populations. He's been touring the U.S. for more than 5 months, endeavoring to A. heighten awareness for the plight of the minority South Africans face on a daily basis, and B. raise the funds to assist the white minority in the event things get so bad there's no other alternative. Although Simon has been on Resistance Radio before, and he and I in fact spoke on an American Freedom Party Nationalist panel hosted by DailyCan.com, I wanted to have him back on our program to chat a bit about his work. I also wanted to find out what exactly went down at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, as he was in fact there as an observer. Simon, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, Jack. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. The media is saturated with people from the left, and the left have no love for people like you and I. They have no love for Western civilization. So the lies they are perpetrating, I believe, they're not white lies. It's been intentional from the get-go. Their idea was to break us down, break down our societies, and I think they've accomplished that. And you look at the United States right now, the entire Trump election, the lies that were perpetrated against the American people. It was planned from day one, from the fabrication that Trump was somehow in bed with the Russians, to the fact that Trump was on the alt-right and Trump was a white supremacist, to the point now where we have this event in Charlottesville, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, where conservatives, right-wingers, Tea Partiers, 3%ers, libertarians, constitutionalists, as well as alt-rights, alt-right types, and white nationalists kind of rallied together and took to the city. And it's quite interesting. I'd rather not go into it too much because I was not there, and you were actually there. So perhaps you could tell our audience a bit about what you saw in Charlottesville and why you were there, and tell us a bit about the media lie regarding Charlottesville.
The best way that I can approach this topic is to explain to you a little bit of background. I wanted to attend the event because I thought that it would be a seminal event in the history of right-wing politics in the USA. I spoke to my girlfriend about it, and I spoke to various other people, and I said right from the beginning, which is close to 6 weeks ago, but I have no intention of getting involved because it would be inappropriate on both a moral and a legal level. On a moral level, I don't think that it's right for me to come to the USA and become involved in domestic American politics. On a legal level, I'm here on a visa, so I can't afford to be involved in any nonsense whatsoever. I have to be squeaky clean at all times. However, I did want to witness the event. After some time, I was offered an opportunity to go with some people, and I accepted that opportunity and went up with a group, an American group, and prior to the event on the Friday night, this subject came up, how would we behave and what would we do? And I then said, look, please be clear, I will not be part of you. I'm here with you and I'm grateful for the hospitality, but I have no intention of participating in the event. I would just like to go and observe. I hope that you don't mind. They said, no, that's fine. We'll keep a good eye on you, and you should just be careful that nothing happens to you.
Can I interject for 1 second? I want to make the point that a lot of my friends in the United States that are involved with the Tea Party, who are constitutional libertarians, they supported this event as well, and they're not even conspicuously pro-white. They're just American civic nationalists. They believe in the Constitution, the First Amendment, the right to assemble, free speech. And you and I were speaking before the program, and you told me yourself that the vast majority of the people that were at the event on the, quote, white supremacist side were in fact not even remotely white supremacists.
Well, that's absolutely correct. There are no two ways about it. Anyway, to continue with the thing, so I did indeed attend the event, and I arrived there with my friends, and then I parted ways almost immediately. They organized themselves into groups, and they entered, they marched down the road to the event. And I was walking on the pavement, on the curbside. And I witnessed with my own eyes that the first attack, the first throwing of punches, the first of anything was done by the people who were standing off the road as these guys that I drove with marched down the middle, and some other organizations.
These are the counter-protesters on the left.
Right, that's correct. And they ran into these groups, and they started throwing punches, spitting, and there was a lot of swearing and insults, and they tried to grab these guys' banners, which, by the way, were not Nazi banners, just to be very clear. They were St. Andrew's crosses, which is obviously something completely benign.
It is Christian, and the left have no love for Christianity at this point. So, yeah.
Yes. And it has a very conspicuous particular tie to Western European culture,
yes,
or to European culture, let's say. Eventually, there was no choice but for these guys to barge their way through these protesters, preventing them from going in. And what is important to note here is, Jack, you and I can safely say that any doctor knows how to do stitches. Any accountant knows how to do mathematics, numbers, counting. Likewise, any police force, any police force in the world knows that the way to prevent a conflict between two groups of people is to step in between them and to keep them apart from one another. From the very beginning, standing on the curbside, observing all of this, I couldn't believe that the police had not, from the get-go, knowing full well where these guys would come from and where they would go to, kept the counter-protesters off to one side. Not denied them, but kept them off to one side. They didn't do that, and it was astonishing to me. And when the fights broke out, the police stood there and watched. Similarly, how can the police... Now, I'm not talking now about ensuring that two groups of people don't get mixed up with one another. I'm now saying if they do get mixed up with one another, how is it that the police didn't intervene? It became clear to me, therefore, from the very beginning, that there was something strange going on. There was something unusual. I had never witnessed anything like that in my whole life, that the police would stand by and watch as people attacked each other with clear intent to do grievous bodily harm. Anyway, eventually we got, I say we because I sort of, as I say, walked on the curbside and straggled along observing all of this stuff. I didn't get into any trouble because I wasn't part of the group. I was off to one side. I didn't walk with them. I was nowhere near them. And so I sort of made my way innocently through the counter-protesters and eventually joined the guys on the grassy knoll, as it were. And then the counter-protesters started rushing towards the group of people again. And so they put up, that is to say, the guys with whom I'd traveled, put up a wall of shields. Now, I'd like to mention to you that prior to the event, these guys had sent representatives to meet with the police force to find out what they could do and what they couldn't do and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And the police force gave them, as I heard it, it was told to everybody very openly, a report back. No knives. Knives are an absolute no-no. And everybody said, well, we don't have knives. We wouldn't take knives. Okay, fine. What's next? No masks. No masks of any type whatsoever will be permitted, including gas masks. Everybody said, gee, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but okay, fine. If that's what they say, no problem. Pepper spray. They said, well, legal pepper spray is okay. In other words, you can't use the pepper spray of the type that has been banned, such as they use on bears and things like that.
So you're saying the police were instructed to permit the Antifa protesters to attack the Unite the Right faction, but they prevented
what I'm
the
saying is that when this attack occurred, they employed very heavy grade pepper spray, which, as I understand it, is illegal. And secondly, they were wearing masks, which the police had told us we may not do. But they permitted them to do it. The police had clearly said that we would be arrested. We, as in the people that I traveled with, would be arrested if they wore masks. But the counter-protesters, the Antifa, were wearing masks and employing this pepper spray. This is not even to talk of the aerosol flamethrowers that we all saw there and that everybody knows about, and which none of the right-wing people used at all. This carried on for about an hour and a half, and I stood there off to one side taking some photographs, moving this way, moving that way, standing amongst this bunch, then going to stand amongst the counter-protesters on the grassy knoll, off the grassy knoll, in the street, on the pavement, or curbside, as you would call it in North America. And I saw all of this from every angle, and it carried on for about an hour and a half. And I kept thinking to myself, how is it possible that a police force can be present when people are clearly trying to commit grievous bodily harm and not intervene? How is that legally possible? And that is what happened. The police stood by and watched for an hour and a half as the people from the rally held a line at the base of the stairs and at the base of the grassy knoll to prevent the counter-protesters from rushing into the event. That is all that happened. It's as simple as that. It's not a complicated thing the way that some people are making it out to be. It's a simple thing.
So what was the end game here? Obviously, the alt-right has been denigrated in the press. I mean, originally I felt that the alt-right had been promoted by the press in order to harm Trump before the election, and then after the election, before the Electoral College met. But once Trump took office in January of this year, I noticed that the alt-right dropped off the map. And the only time they were mentioned by the mainstream media is when they could use some of the controversy surrounding the right to attack Trump. So initially when I saw this, obviously I was not at the event, but I initially thought that the fact that the mainstream media was covering this to such an extent was a way to sort of attack Trump. Because if you look at the vast majority of the newspaper articles today, some of the online stories in the BBC and in Europe as well, they're making more of a big deal out of the fact that Trump didn't really come out until today to attack the white protesters. They seem to be more concerned with how Trump reacted to it, the actual deaths at the scene and some of the other issues. It seems as though it's being used to attack Trump's presidency. Am I correct in that, or do you think it goes deeper than that?
Absolutely, that's what's happening. I think that it's a frantic bid to say, well, this guy must be bad because he doesn't support our version of the narrative. He must be really an evil man. But their version of the narrative is 100% false. Every single aspect and facet of it is false. The violence was committed, was instigated, was begun by the counter-protesters. The right-wingers formed a barrier at the base of the grassy knoll so that the protesters wouldn't be able to rush into the event. They never advanced. They never attacked. They never did anything. They formed a line there. Those protesters then threw many plastic bottles filled with urine, and they used this incredibly powerful pepper spray or mace or whatever you'd like to call it. And they repeatedly attacked the guys with, while wearing masks, with these flamethrowers. And that is the exact opposite of what the media is reporting. So I think that what the media is doing is stamping its foot harder because they're not getting the attention that they want from the president. The president is not saying, oh, dear me, that's disgusting. But it firstly has to be predicated on the fact that it's true. And I suspect that the president is aware that the media has completely co-opted this entire narrative. And therefore, that's the reason in the first place that he's not condemning it. He's not condemning it because he doesn't feel strongly about wrongfulness. He doesn't believe the wrongfulness that the media is reporting, because presumably he's also has some sources that are telling him, hey, listen, buddy, everything that they're saying is fundamentally untrue and it's on video.
It's quite a remarkable situation, but that's how it transpired in Great Britain as well during the previous general election in 2015. I ran for parliament for the United Kingdom Independence Party, and the left were given free rein. They could do as they wish. I mean, I had been targeted in town when I was out campaigning, and if I had contacted the police, I would have been told there's nothing they could do about it. It got so bad that I allowed things to just carry on as they were, that eventually they threatened to kill me at my hustings event. They actually shut down the parliamentary debate in town. And ultimately, I reacted with anger. So I started to become more hostile to the left and in the press, I became slightly hostile. And at some stage, I attacked via Twitter several left-wing politicians. And at that point then,
Yes.
they turned it around on me. The police were called, and I actually had my house raided by the police. They accused me of hate speech, when all I did was criticize the sorts of people that had been giving me a hard time the entire campaign. And so I like.
Yes,
So
yes.
when I saw that young fellow who allegedly plowed his car into those left-wing protesters, I felt that this was something that either was orchestrated or they allowed to happen, because they needed this to happen. Inevitably, there was going to be some sort of a pushback. There has to be a pushback. I mean, when you're struck, at some point, even the biggest pacifist will strike back. You can only take so much abuse, as mentioned earlier. And so, obviously, there was going to be some sort of pushback. And they struck gold, because if this actually took place, and if this car actually hit those protesters and killed this girl, the official, obviously, media narrative is saying that this has taken place, and he was a right-winger, supposedly. They've struck gold. They've struck gold. They can shut us all down. They can take down our sites. They can label us terrorists. And at that point, then, we no longer are protected by the First Amendment in the United States. We're protected by any free speech laws in the United Kingdom. And this is quite a dangerous situation that we find ourselves in. So what I'm trying to say is here, part of it was, I think, to attack Trump. But I think also there was something a bit more devious at play here. I think that they recognize that the alternative media, YouTube and podcasts like these and the work you're doing and your speaking tour, that we are reaching an astounding amount of people, and we are literally controlling the narrative in the alternative media. And they're trying to shut us down. And they have now an excuse that we're terrorists and we're murderers now, because look what happened in Charlottesville. I think they allowed this to fester, and they allowed the situation to get worse, because at some point they expected the right to hit back. And when they did, you knew it would be covered in the news.
Yes, yes. You know, I have reservations about that incident, because I've seen a video which, as far as I know, has not appeared on any media site, social media site, mainstream media, etc., at all. I've seen a video that was taken by one of the guys associated with the gang that I was traveling with, and I'll tell you what, it suggests something very, very different. I don't want to stick my neck out too far, but I think that time will tell that the matter is not as simple as it has been made out to be by the media at all. At all. It's a far cry. You know, there's another thing worth mentioning, Jack, is that this event was given a permit to happen fundamentally predicated on the constitutional amendment that permits free speech and the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
And freedom of assembly as well, of course.
Yes, right. And there's no reason why it shouldn't have happened. I mean, from the point of view of the liberals, if they genuinely believe in free speech, then why shouldn't the event have happened? If they believe in it.
Well, they don't.
Remember one thing, Jack.
They don't, obviously, at this point. I mean,
right.
I think
remember one thing. In the media, there has been terrific coverage of the fact that there were some flags there that were quasi-Nazi. They certainly weren't, as I know my history, and I'm fairly well informed on this topic, they weren't by any stretch of the imagination Nazi. However, what the media has not shown is the number of Union of Soviet Socialist Republic flags that were there. In other words, the media is saying, look, the right wing is Nazi. But the media is not saying, oh, dear me, the left wing, look at them, they're Stalinist. And oh, gracious, as we all know, Stalin killed far more innocent human beings than the Nazis could ever have dreamed of doing if they'd been in power for 100 years.
I mean, a few years ago,
this is again just indicative.
A few years ago, President Obama, he had the Christmas tree White House. There was a little photograph that they found in some sort of social media account linked to somebody who worked in the White House, and they took a photograph of a Christmas tree bauble with Chairman Mao's face on it. And when the White House was contacted about this, they laughed it off. Can you imagine if Donald Trump had a Christmas bauble on his tree this December with Hitler's face on it?
Right. Exactly. You know, this is a very, very difficult challenge that we have, Jack. To try and make this thing at all balanced is almost impossible. But hopefully some people listening to this broadcast of yours will say to themselves, oh, dear, that Simon guy sounds like he's, reasonably honest. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. In which case, immediately this whole thing is turned on its head, because many people are looking at the pictures and seeing these flags and thinking, oh, gracious, I'm not like that at all. I'm not a Nazi. My grandfather fought in World War II against the Nazis, blah, 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 blah. And so now they're immediately persuaded that they should steer clear of this kind of stuff.
Of course.
And maybe the media is telling the truth. Hopefully they will believe and trust me when I tell them that there were scores of Union of Soviet Socialist Republic flags. That should immediately bring some fairness to this conversation. And hopefully, when people contemplate the fact that this event was legally permitted by a federal judge.
Yeah, correct, yes.
But the counter-protest in the street had no official permit whatsoever. It will cause people to begin to understand that something is not quite right.
And quite remarkably, I've read that the typically left-wing or left-promoting ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, they actually took the side of the Unite the Right faction. So initially when they wanted to shut down the Unite the Right event, the ACLU came to bat for your side, or for the side of the people that you attended the event with as an observer. So there is really no moral or legal grounds for the counter-protest. Yet we're told by the press that the counter-protesters had the right to be there, and they had the moral justification for fighting back, as if the Unite the Right event was an offensive event, when in reality it was just a peaceful protest, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, here's something very interesting. At one point, eventually after standing by and watching while people hammered one another to smithereens, the police came on the megaphone, the bullhorn, I think they call it here in North America, and they said, under the powers vested in the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, blah, 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 this is now an illegal gathering. Yeah. Everybody disperse. Those in the park and on the road. And on one or two occasions, the policeman emphasized the road. So he would say something like, in terms of the powers vested in the governor, blah, 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 the people in the park must get off. And then he would turn to the people in the road and say, also the road, also the road. So he would emphasize the road more than the park. Obviously, he was thinking to himself, well, the people in the park know full well that I'm talking to them, but I need to be double clear to the counter-protesters, because they may not, kind of get it. I need to be double clear with them that they must also move out. Now, once the park had been cleared, the counter-protesters were left there. They were still there half an hour later. I came back half an hour later because I got lost. And so I had to sort of retrace my footsteps. And they were still there in a group of, I would say, comfortably 500, probably closer to 700. Now, how is this possible, Jack? Explain to me. How is this possible if the police were being even half even-handed about this thing?
Precisely, yeah. I say in closing, if I can ask you a couple of questions about the event so we can kind of get a fair analysis of the sorts of people that were there. What percentage of the people at the protests in the Unite the Right faction would you say were white nationalists, would you say? What percentage?
Jack, I counted. I've spent 25 years doing live events as a live event project manager. So I've spent a quarter of a century assessing the number of people in a room or a stadium or whatever else as part of my job as a project manager. I wouldn't say that I'm a genius at counting, but I can count well enough when there's a group of people in front of me. Thank you very much. And I can tell you now categorically that not more than 25% of the gross total of the rally of the right-wing people were white nationalists. That's not an opinion. If I may be so arrogant, I'd like to insist that that's a fact.
That coincides with what I was told as well. I spent some time in the United States. My father was heavily involved with the Right to Life Party, which protests abortion. It's a Christian conservative party, and they are involved with many 3% events or Tea Party events, American conservatives, libertarians, constitutionalists. And from what I've been told by friends of mine in the United States, over 75% of the people that were there on the right side were just standard, typical civic nationalists, people who were not racially aware in any way, people that would just call themselves conservatives, freedom lovers, constitutionalists. So the way the media is portraying the Unite the Right, it's as if it's 100% neo-Nazis, when in reality, at most 25% alt-right white nationalists. And of those people,
yes,
the vast majority of the alt-right you wouldn't even label as, quote, neo-Nazis. Like, very few skinheads or people who are conspicuously racist by their appearance. People just look just like normal white guys, just with a sign up, and they're just protesting for their rights.
All the guys that I traveled with are Christians, practicing, observing Christians. And therefore, they detest Nazism. They're guys who are white nationalists, but they are dead opposed to Nazism. Some of them because of Hitler's involvement with the occult or alleged involvement with the occult. I don't know how you want to put it. And some of them because of the persecution of the Jews. And so the list goes on. Not one single one of those people is a pro-Hitler Nazi person. That's just a matter of fact.
And you mentioned earlier how the police instructed the Unite the Right faction not to wear masks or carry any weapons or cover their faces or use certain symbols. So what percentage of the Unite the Right side would you say were breaking those rules, covering their faces and behaving in the manner they were told not to?
None. None. I can tell you now that I didn't come across a single person at that rally other than the Antifa,
exactly.
Whatever you call them, the counter-protesters.
That was my next question.
There were some guys wearing helmets.
That's fair enough, though. Yeah,
sorry.
My next question was, what percentage of the left would you say were covering their faces?
Oh, maybe about 10%. Maybe of the people directly in front of us, probably significantly higher. Of the people who were further away, significantly lower. So let's call it 10%.
And you did not see one instance where the police engaged people who were covering their faces on the left?
No.
Remarkable. I mean, again, does not surprise me. The official media narrative is that the right were dangerous, violent, white supremacists, wearing masks, carrying weapons, recklessly driving vehicles into crowds of innocent bystanders, when in reality, the picture you've drawn is one of pretty much law-abiding Unite the Right protesters being attacked by protesters who did not have a legal right to be there and who were engaging in violent behavior. Is that correct, pretty much?
Yeah, who instigated the violent behavior. I'm not saying that the guys on the right never defended themselves.
Oh, which is perfect.
But I am saying, as a matter of fact, that the violence began with the counter-protesters, and conspicuously more of the violence was perpetrated by the counter-protesters.
I guess we'll tie this up with one last question. What will come of this? Do you think that they will crack down on people like you and I? Will they shut down more YouTube channels, and will they engage in more underhanded activities to stifle our ability to speak freely? You've seen Red Ice Radio now has been hit heavily and hit hard and often by hackers. They've lost their subscribers and their sites have come down, and obviously, we lost our YouTube channel some time ago. They're coming after us. It's pretty obvious that they're stifling our ability to speak freely. So what is the end game here? Is it to shut us down totally, use hate speech legislation in Europe, as well as perhaps eventually martial law in the United States to actually shut down people like us from even protesting? What's the end game here? Or is it really just about, Donald Trump and making him look bad, which some people actually believe?
Yeah, no, I think that it's to shut down this nascent right-wing explosion. Jack, I've traveled the USA, the length and breadth of the USA for over 5 months now. And there is something quite remarkable happening from Florida to California, from California to Washington State, from Washington State to Pennsylvania, or wherever we go. These young, fresh-faced, nicely spoken, good-looking, fit, healthy men particularly are in these rooms, sitting up straight with their hands on their laps, conducting themselves superbly, presenting this wonderful, wonderful, not even image, the substance in the right wing. And I think that it terrifies the hell out of the left wing.
Let's hope so. Let's hope it grows. Let's hope they start recognizing that it has to stop. I hope that they don't stifle our free speech where we can't continue to spread the message. I am concerned a little bit. Like I've said, as you've noticed, even people like Jordan Peterson have had their accounts taken down. People like Mark Dice, who is hardly what you would call a white nationalist, he's had his videos demonetized. It's just across the board. It's just from harassment to just censorship. We are being shut down, and I am concerned, though, that although the movement is growing, that they will shut it down before it does actually take off. Because, at the end of the day, although the numbers are growing, we're still only talking about, again, our event in Britain had 75 people in it, and other events I've been to in the United States have had maybe 100, 200 people in it. But, we're not seeing, events with 5, 10, 15,000 people yet. But that could happen in 5, 10 years if we can somehow, if we can fend this off, if we can somehow fend the censorship off, if we can stand strong. I really hope we can. Do you think we can, or do you think that they will shut us down before we grow to that level?
I think that the right wing of the USA and Europe doesn't perceive the severity of the threat to them. And I have said this before. I said it at the Amring conference, and I very politely said to the gentlemen and ladies in the room, I'm sure that comment might give offense to you because you are the beating heart of the right wing in the USA, and you'd like to believe that you know better than anybody the extent of the threat. However, with all due respect, you haven't watched this movie before. I have. We South Africans have. We know how it plays out. We know the tactics they use. And they only play their hand conspicuously when they believe that they've got you all wrapped up. They're a bit like a python that slithers into the sleeping bag of a camper in the woods and wraps itself silkenly, smoothly around this chap. And as it moves across this person's skin, they, in their sort of dream state, enjoy the sensation, oblivious, but they think something wonderful is happening to them in their dreams. And the python only clenches tight when it has wrapped itself properly around the person's body. That's how they work. And they are showing, they're playing their hands now because they believe that they've already won. And people need to begin to appreciate that the problem really is quite severe. And I'm not going to labor that point. We can speak about it at another time, and I can give you numerous electrifying examples of why we South African right-wingers believe that you guys have left it too late. Having said that, I'm going to contradict myself and say this, that if they do attempt to shut down the right wing in the USA and in Europe, because the two are of similar maturity and they share many characteristics, they will create a panic amongst those people who are sitting on the fence. Many people will develop a martyr complex about this. Many people will say, gee, these guys, there's something wrong here. How come? And I think that they're afraid to shut you guys down completely. On the other hand, if they leave you alone, you will continue to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, because much of what is happening in the world at the moment is clearly wrong. Any fool can see that. And converts are being won daily here in the USA. So that's not a definitive answer, but it seems to me that it covers a few angles, and perhaps that will be food for thought for your listeners.
It's been a truly fascinating hour, I have to say. It's one of the best programs I think I've done. Just how you view the world, and coming from South Africa, like you said, you've seen this before. You've seen a country that was controlled by a right-wing government lose its power and eventually just lose to the left entirely. And although, obviously, we don't have power in the West at this point, we are gaining strength and we are gaining ground. And,
yes.
The young people are waking up, as you've rightfully said. The vast majority of the millennials now are recognizing that they're being indoctrinated with lies that are leading to their destruction. And I think that they are waking up to that fact. And, obviously, something is going to have to give at some point. And we'll see what happens. It's certainly an exciting time to be a political activist, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to speak freely for a little bit longer. I really do hope so. I mean, we've lost a lot of those rights in the United Kingdom with the new hate speech legislation that's been implemented. But, in the United States, they do have that funny little First Amendment that guarantees their right to freedom of speech, and it's something I wish we had over here. Although the United States may not be the freest country on the planet, that Constitution is a wonderful document. I hope that if Trump can somehow grab 2 more Supreme Court justices and put 2 more of his men or women on the Supreme Court and give us a majority on the Supreme Court. And I say us, I mean people who are generally conservative. I think perhaps we will be protected in the United States under the Constitution. But if by chance Trump is impeached or he feels his hands are tied and things go badly for him and he can't implement the sorts of legislation he wants, I fear that if he's voted out in 2020, there will be a huge crackdown. I mean, Hillary Clinton had won. Perhaps maybe this event would have not taken place in Charlottesville. Perhaps it would have been shut down sooner. Perhaps they use this event to sort of nip the right wing in the bud before it does grow. But
yes,
yeah, I don't know what would have happened if Hillary Clinton was in power. Would this event have taken place, and would it have been shut down sooner? I don't know. But I really am hopeful that we continue to grow and this message continues to spread and young people continue to recognize that they're being lied to and that if they don't change course soon, that their countries are gone. The countries their great-grandparents built, their great-great-grandparents built, they'll be gone and there'll be nothing left to hold on to. I mean, you're from South Africa. You know what it's like to see a wonderful, prosperous country with great values to turn into rack and ruin.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen it firsthand, and it's enough to make you weep. We are very concerned for our children's sakes at the moment, Jack. I mean, the way things are going, it's almost not right to kind of abandon them to it, in the sense that as the older generation, we're going to die off and they're going to be left holding the baby. But if white people in the world, good white people, not white people filled with hatred, good, decent, respectable, nice white people can begin to wake up and see what has been done to their culture over the past 50 years and how it is now diametrically opposite to what it was. The culture of our grandparents and so on, going back generations, is completely different to the culture that we now think of as
Western culture, correct.
Christian Caucasian cultural paradigm. If we can wake up and consolidate, if we can find solidarity and stand together through thick and thin, we can change the world. We can do wonderful, magnificent things, such as our people have been famous for doing for centuries. But we have to wake up very soon, and we have to consolidate ourselves as urgently as possible.
And one thing I will say to conclude this is that, one thing I've noticed during this conversation is that you have a message of hope and love. And that's rare on the right. And I think that more and more people will have to come forward with this sort of message because, this message of hatred, although it's reactionaries, especially millennials, will kind of latch on when they're frustrated and they're full of angst as young people onto this kind of hateful message. Eventually they will shed that. They'll leave that behind as they get older. But in order for us to grow and continue to evolve, we will need to start pushing a message of hope, kindness, of love for one another, and love for what we're losing. I think that's really important. And I've noticed that recently, and when I've spoken to people like Jared Taylor and obviously other people I've interviewed on the channel, that a lot of the people in charge of this, I hate to use the word in charge, but people in charge of what we're doing, they are filled with love and hope. And I'm hopeful that more people will recognize that we are pushing a message of kindness and hope. This is not a hate-filled message. This is a message of preservation. We're looking to preserve what was great and leave something behind for our children. And like you said, I mean, South Africa, what's left for those white children now? Absolutely nothing but death and destruction.
Yes, well, I hope so. Let's say our prayers and hope that we get some intervention from the mighty God who has blessed us this far.
I hope so as well. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down and have a chat with me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Jack.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Simon. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Resistance Radio. You're listening to Resistance Radio.